Welcome back to Talk Live at the Research Desk. I'm slightly to the side of the research desk, or slightly adjacent to the research desk. I'm at the electronics bench right now. That's where we're coming to you from now because for some reason the video cameras don't want to work on Linux. So that being said, it's time to move on to tonight's broadcast. We're going to move a little bit further down the road in terms of our question, but in our question on is atheism dead? We found that there's a fundamental shift as demonstrated in quantum physics that really places a limit on what we consider scientific truth. That scientific truth is more of a concept, it's more of a philosophy than it is an actual reality. This pushes the understanding of atheism back to a philosophy. As I say, it pushes it back to a theism and not necessarily a science. And if you want to believe in atheism as a theism, then that's fine, but it's not. There isn't any longer a scientific truth as we would understand it, because we never reach this absolute truth. We approach it, but we never achieve it. Achieving the absolute is impossible because it's asymptotic. At least that's what we've seen so far. And then, in other words, at a large number of levels throughout the scale of physics, from micro all the way up to macro, the principles behind the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That in other words, that there's always some degree of uncertainty. That, in other words, that knowledge is asymptotic. I should say absolute knowledge is asymptotic. Seems to be holding, and this is sort of reflected in dark matter and dark energy. That dark matter and dark energy is now estimated to be 95% of the universe, and only the visible, the only part that we can see and sort of measure with the sort of electromagnetic spectrum. That this only makes up 5% of the total sum that's there. So the 5% of the universe is what we see. 95% is unseen and comprises of this stuff called dark matter and dark energy. And because we've never seen it, we really don't know what it is. But if you're a researcher, if you're an explorer, that's not an issue, because that simply gives you more to explore. It's actually a good thing for you, because there's more to do now. And the thing is that more often than not, most people, as soon as you touch on the whole concept of atheism, immediately take the assumption that you're arguing religion, and that's not what we're doing here. We're arguing science. And my argument actually is if a religion is indeed true, or the truth, and we want to say that it contains, or at least represents, the truth, then that religion should be treated in many ways like a science. In other words, from my understanding as a physicist, that if you treat a science, if you treat a theology or a theism, and this is the proper term, the theism, and that's the underlying basis for religion. This is what you believe in a religion. If you treat theism as a science, just the way you would quantum mechanics, that if your theism is indeed true, then this truth will be demonstrated in a term, and so as it would meet up with the science that you're already seeing. It would meet up with the evidence that you're already seeing, with your observation. And as I said before, that what you're looking at now is, rather than having your standard scientific method, which is creating an experiment to demonstrate what you already know. In other words, take your hypothesis, which is what you believe, which you're testing your hypothesis. That's the whole reason for the experiment. You set your method up so the observations show your hypothesis, and if that's the case, you do a good job, and that's the case, then your conclusions are then mirror your hypothesis, and now you have a confirmation for your theory. In open exploration, hypothesis and conclusion is completely done away with, because you're not leading theoretically, you're leading experimentally. As you're leading experimentally, your theory forms around the experimental data. In other words, you do not go out and try to fit your data to the experiment. You try to go out and say, okay, let's go back to this whole Higgs boson thing. The Higgs boson issue, and this was on CERN. CERN, and most of the scientists around CERN are classical scientists. They believe in theory first, and they went to try to find a particle that met their theory that says this is what a Higgs boson should be. Well, they claim they succeeded, but they didn't. They actually failed, because the Higgs boson that they did find, well, let's at this point, let's give them the argument, let's call it the Higgs boson at this point in time. The Higgs boson that they did find did not meet, or did not exactly meet, their theoretical expectations. It was a candidate that had very close similarities. It had no other, and it was not similar to other particles or other bosons that they had found. So this was a brand new particle, and this brand new particle, which met the classification of boson, they readjusted their equation and called it the Higgs boson. And so they basically, as I said, fit the data to meet the theory. In other words, they confirm their theory simply by adjusting the equation, the model, and saying, yay, it fit, and we found it. And that's the Greek. Everyone calls it Eureka, but it's not Eureka. It's Tovrika. Tovrika. That's the term. It's It's T-O-U. Vrika. But now it's come out across the annals of history as Eureka. That's not necessarily important, but so what happens is that you see here that you don't necessarily have science being brought up to the public the way the researchers see this, and this was actually pointed out. This whole issue called candidacy, that you don't actually have an object you're looking for, but you have a candidate, and the candidate fits your theory to a certain degree, and so therefore you now have to adjust your theory, but you don't necessarily tell the public that's what's happened. And this is actually what happens in black holes. They've never found a black hole. They have candidates for black holes, and as their measurements, as their research progressed on these black holes, and they had more and more of them, their theory evolved to meet what they were seeing. In other words, but the thing is, again, they didn't come out to the public and tell them this. This was not said. This is something specific to the researcher. And the thing is, this was the same thing with the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson, they began talking about a candidate, and it wasn't until they did enough mathematics and you had enough independent confirmation that the mathematics was indeed correct, in terms of the adjustments, that this candidate was indeed the Higgs boson. So what happens is, in the physics realm, it's still the candidate, right? There are candidate particles that would now fit the new equation for the Higgs boson. It didn't meet the old equation, but there's now a new equation for the Higgs boson, and they're now saying, well, this is it. This is the milestone, even though it wasn't what they were necessarily expecting. So this is why I say that predeterministic physics, or deterministic physics, is something that needs to be put to bed, and rather than using the classical scientific method, you get rid of the hypothesis, you get rid of the conclusions, and all you have left is the method and observation. Well, this is, and as I said before, most scientists will not do this, because if you're looking for funding for your project, no one's going to fund your project if you've got no idea what you're doing or where you're going to go with this. It's something that is up and open, and unless you find a way to fund things yourself, and that's exactly what I've done, is I've gone out and used spin-off products, spin-off services from the research that goes on in here to fund the research. So the research is indirectly funded, and in other words, the funding has no direct effect on the research itself. So the research is in terms of its purity, in terms of its esoteric, in terms of the term independent, it is as independent as you're going to get. You're not really going to get any more independent than this. And this is where my argument is, that this is where it should go. And this is exactly how you treat theism too. Now that we've sort of knocked the ball, or knocked the legs from under knocked the scientific legs from underneath atheism, and it moves back to atheism. There's no reason to approach theism simply as a philosophy, but now, because the door has been opened, particularly with M theory, for parallel universes, which could include spiritual universe, or spiritual universes, more than one spiritual universe, that it is now possible to open the door from a scientific point of view to theism. In other words, treating theism, the study of God, the philosophy of God, as a science. You take it from a philosophy to a science. And this is kind of where we're going, and I'd like to kind of make this note on it, because this sort of argument kind of came around. It's not an argument that I was yelling at somebody. It was just that when one person makes a point and another person makes a point, academically they're called arguments. That's the term. That's the proper term, is arguments. And I got a reply back from Jeremy, and he says, "Thank you for addressing my previous comment. I did not know when I posted it that you would reply in a video, and I really wasn't expecting it to be read out loud. So I apologize for the awkward wording." And there's no need to apologize. There's no need to say sorry, for the particular reason that this is a complex subject, and we're gonna deal with a lot of complex wording. And I don't know how old people are when they're talking, particularly if their images are hidden. And that's not. I don't have a problem as long as the comment comes up. I'll answer it. I'm not going to worry too much about right now. And anyways, who's behind it? Because there are other ways to deal with these particular issues. And if we're going to deal with it as a science, then the science is going to demonstrate where we're going to go from next. And this is the whole thing. It's going to be about the research and not about one person's particular opinion or another. And this includes me. It's not going to be about my opinion. We're looking at the research and what the research tells us. And so there isn't a defined direction or a predetermined direction as to where things are going to go, because you want the research itself to tell you where you're going to be going. So this is kind of where I'm at with that. So and I said before, we're on YouTube. The YouTube way to answer comments is, because we do have channels here, is to post a video. If you don't feel like posting a video, no problem. Don't worry about it. Post a comment down below. But I'm going to be answering my stuff in a video. I'm going to be posting a link to this, particularly if it influences and pushes the discussion further. I mean, you can't go into the depth and detail in terms of a comment and a counter comment. So an argument and a counter argument. You can't do that down below in the comments. You have to do this in a discussion. This is the discussion here, and it actually makes the broadcast better. It makes the whole issue better. So So, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid if the wording doesn't come out right. I understand these things are complex and that sometimes uh, as you're writing it, the words don't necessarily come to you as you think of it. I mean, you write it, you post it, and then after you post it, then you go, oh, it's after you've posted it. 5-10 minutes after you've posted, you realize what you should have said. That there was a better way to phrase what you said. But this is the entire purpose for what we're doing, and that's one of the reasons why I'm up here is that I need to sort of think about what I'm saying. I need to think about the notes that I've taken, and this is a way for me to mull over the notes that I've taken, to mull over, to look at the research. What did I see? This is a way to sort of do that. This is in many ways what's going on night after night when we're doing our live thing here. This is the colloquia. This is an online live colloquia. This is my essay, and I'm putting my essay together from my notes as we're doing it online. This is an essay, and the essay is being written live as we as we do this. So the essay has not been pre-written. I'm not reading something. This is the essay being created right up front. So as I said, we've kind of gone from, as I said, from the point where atheism it was a science, now brought it back to a theism again, to a philosophy, and because there's enough evidence in quantum physics to state that a parallel, because particularly with using string theory, if you go into M theory, there's now evidence for an argument for a parallel universes. This could be a spiritual universe. This gives us now some degree of understanding that we can now maybe treat the spiritual universe as a parallel universe, and this gives us a door in through physics to understand theism as a science, to research theism as a science, or in exactly the same manner, and then produce a theism that is, if you want to call it, scientifically based. In other words, the theism, the issue of God is not going to be conflicting with science. What we see in terms of observation and experiment. It may disagree with our thoughts and views, but that's all right. That's all right for it to do that, because in many cases we interpret what we see. We have an interpretation to a certain degree. We interpret what we see in our data. It's not. Our understanding of data is not complete. It's only approximate. It's only within a certain degree of understanding. So this kind of confines us to saying, I know, to saying, well, yeah, I kind of know. Even though when someone says, I know, if you're used to this enough, and you say, I know, the qualifier for the I know is that if you're a physicist on the quantum physics side, and you're working in this sort of probabilistic universe, your yeah, I know, or I understand is not an absolute anymore, but is an approximate, and can never really be taken as an absolute anymore. Well, although people do, most people in society today do take things as the appropriate. The probabilistic society, the reality of quantum physics has not hit mainstream society. Most mainstream society has stayed well within the confines of a deterministic society, a deterministic science. And so most of the science that's being taught in schools, most of the science that's being presented to the public, particularly on PBS, Discovery, and a lot of the new science channels that pop up on YouTube. Most of the science channels on YouTube are like PBS. They're like Discovery Channel or the Science Channel. And they talk about a deterministic, they present science in a very deterministic point of view. That things are already known, there's nothing new to know about, and these are the facts. Well, they're not facts. They're not. This is it. They're not facts. There are things that are not known. Matter of fact, there's a lot that's not known. I mean, if you consider, but in terms of our total sum knowledge, if we take the assumption that we know the entire visible universe, we've seen the universe that we have, our visible universe, all the stars, the galaxies, and so on and so forth. Let's say take the assumption, and we haven't. As a matter of fact, we haven't done this. We haven't seen the entire universe, but let's take the assumption we have. Even if we get to seeing the entire universe, or we say we have, we're still missing 95%. 95% is still unknown. It's still hidden from us. It's not within our grasp. As I said, for the classical physicist, for the person who's presenting physics as a sort of absolute knowledge type of thing, this presents a real problem. And same thing with the whole thing for an atheist who goes back to the old deterministic science that no longer applies to quantum physics or superstring theory. It presents a problem, but if you're a physicist or if you're a researcher in this field looking at quantum mechanics and you've accepted that the universe is a probabilistic universe, then it's not a problem because it just simply gives you more to study. That's all. There's more to do. You've got further to go, and for me, my funding is pretty much independent. I've got enough income coming in. I'm happy with it, so I grow every year. No issue for me. No real issues for me. I mean, I'm not going to become rich. I don't think I'm going to become rich over this, but that's not the point. It's not the point here for myself anyways. Anyways, this sort of takes us, that's kind of where we ended up yesterday. And we're sort of continuing the conclusion today because, once again, I'm thanking Jeremy. I'm sorry, Jeremy, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. And I'm not going to try to butcher it. Let's call him Jeremy H. And that's good enough. That's good enough for now. And this leads us into a variety of results and actually consequences for society. And the first one that we'll sort of take a look at, but that kind of came up together, and is the whole issue of psychology and psychiatry. And I'm just rearranging my notes here a little bit because I'm going to rearrange my points. Because I realize it's better to introduce psychology. I had to introduce chemical man and electric man to begin with, but I'm going to introduce the psychological aspect from Freud and his nephew Edward Bernays first. And this was a science that was basically from the 1900s well into 1945. And basically became the basis of psychology, as the basis of the psychology we know today. Of course, Sigmund Freud is considered to be the father of psychology. He was one of these scientists, so-called scientists, I would say, that came up and was an atheist. And so what he did, ironically enough, I don't know how much he actually realized this, but he did it anyways. This is what's been done in history. You've got the whole field of psychology here to prove this. But psychology can't be termed a science because it's a pseudoscience. It isn't. Psychology fundamentally, from its own arguments, from its own philosophy, from its own theory, doesn't exist. So psychology is a non-existent science. It's a non-existent area. Same thing with psychiatry. Psychiatry is also non-existent. So how can you say that? Well, the person's an atheist, right? Freud was an atheist, and a large chunk of the psychologists were atheists, particularly those who did the developing work for psychology. The development of psychiatry gave way to the development of neurology, neuroscience, neurochemistry, and as such, if these fields are interconnected with psychiatry, and more often than not, they're dealt with the psychiatric hospital. You're dealing with what we call a non-existent science. And let's go into their own arguments. Their own arguments is that man is temporal, he's mortal, there is no soul. This means that man is, in terms of his function, is purely chemical in origin. This is the psychiatric side of things. The psychology type side of things, the psychologist side of things, stated that man's influence and behavior was a result of his environment and nothing more. So it was an environmental factor that you behave the way you behave. And the psychiatrists, who eventually gave way to the neurologists, and those psychiatrists are still around today, but they are pretty much more often than not neurologists now, argued that that everything we do, all of our behaviors, everything like that, is all chemical. And this actually began in the around 1890, around there, but it just didn't really sort of pick up and really get anywhere to a large degree until basically the early 1900s. It was in the early 1900s to the 1930s that it really took off, and that you had the sort of blossoming or the blooming of the Freudian theory. And the thing is, psychiatry, neurology all emerged from this whole concept of Freud's concept, and this sort of gave a lot of groundwork to the other chemists who believed man was a chemical machine. This was about chemical man, and they were known as the eugenicists. The eugenicists eventually evolved into genetics. That was basically 1980, 1990, in terms of when they really began looking at the genetics of life, in terms of sort of really finding the genes, really sort of starting to look at in terms of how you manipulate them in the lab. The whole issue of GM is sort of in that 1980 to 1990. It's in that range there. But before then, even though they had found, Watson and Crick had found and done a photograph through X-ray crystallography, had done a photograph or somewhat of a photograph of the DNA molecule. Their actual understanding of the DNA molecule was very minute. They really didn't have much control over it. They could sort of see it, but they couldn't manipulate it. They couldn't work with it. And that didn't come until about 1980, 1990. That's when when it came out, when it started emerging and it started, coming more and more to the surface. But anyways, let's go back to the whole issue of psychiatry and psychology and psychiatry as being a non-existent science or a pseudoscience. And it has to do with the fact that because they state there is no soul, then there can't be a psychology. And the reason being is that if you go into the term psychology, it's two Greek words. It's psycho. Psycho is actually the first part. That's the psych, or the psyche. And there's the logi, right? Psychologia. That's the proper Greek pronunciation. That's the proper Greek terminology. So you go back to do your etymology. You go back to study the origin of the word, and you find that psyche, for both psychiatry and psychology, means soul or spirit. And if you're stating that the soul and spirit does not exist, and then you're naming your science this, then fundamentally you now have a fundamental contradiction, and that means that basically your own stuff, you don't exist. There is no existence to yourself or the theory that you've got a major fundamental contradiction. But that didn't really seem to matter. They seemed to want to press that ahead anyways, and that's exactly what they did. They pressed ahead with their own minds, and convinced that that they had something, that this was something significant, and went ahead with it. They weren't necessarily happy with what they found, but they found what they found, and basically found that human beings had some odd behaviors. Particularly, they had a herding type of behavior that typically man behaved as a group psychology. In other words, a group think would occur over most of the population. There would be some who would be on the fringes, wouldn't necessarily accept the group think, but you'd have a general majority of the society that would fall within this group think and that behave like a herd in terms of how they think and how they perceive things, and that they could be moved and shifted back and forward. And this is how the mob becomes now a weapon. And as this was understood, that you can actually manipulate the mob as a weapon, and this is actually realized by Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays. He says, not only could you use this as a weapon, but you can use this economically. You can get people to buy things. You can create a consumer society simply because you influence them psychologically to do so. If you can get something, an idea, popular enough, this idea grows and becomes the norm. And all of a sudden, everybody has to have that normal thing. Because if you don't have that normal thing, if you don't have that trend, then you're not part of society. In other words, they make something necessary because society says that it's necessary. And so therefore, if you don't have this thing, you're not part of society. And then we actually see this in schools today. We see this in schools. If you don't have the right cell phone, if you don't have Apple iPod, you don't have the right cell phone, then you don't belong to the main group of society, and you're cast aside. If you're not wearing the right jeans, if you're not wearing the right shoes, and so on and so forth. There are a number of categories what this works in. And this was the invention of mass marketing. As this work was going on, this is when you also had the development of your secret societies worked out of this. They evolved in this environment as well. Although the secret societies were never atheistic. They were theists. They just believed in other gods. They believed in the evolution of mankind. And they needed a way to get the general public out of its way so that they could work on their pursuits of evolving man to the next level. In other words, they believed in the evolution of man, and they believed that man was stuck at an evolutionary level, and that the masses in society were preventing the next evolution, and that if they got rid of the masses, or at least got them out of the way, they could evolve man to the next level and achieve what they could consider immortality. And here we go once again. We're going to have to interrupt this broadcast. I am going to come back and do this, but there's a particular issue that I got to take care of immediately, and this is what happens during a live broadcast. They do get interrupted, so I'm going to come back and continue the broadcast within a few minutes.